The First Crusade unleashed how faith forged an empire. What happens when a barefoot preacher, a Norman warlord, and a pope with a flair for drama all decide to liberate the most contested city on earth? Why did tens of thousands of knights, peasants, and opportunists march across continents, starve in deserts, and slaughter in cities, all for a cause they believed was divine? This is not just a story of swords and sermons. It's a tale of betrayal, divine visions, siege towers built from dismantled ships, and a final assault so brutal it left Jerusalem soaked in blood and crowned in chaos. Let's dive in. In the Middle Ages, Europe and the Middle East were like two neighbors who shared a fence and occasionally lobbed flaming chickens over it. On one side, Christendom, a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and baronies, all loosely united by faith and frequently divided by everything else. On the other, the Muslim world, a sprawling realm of caliphates, sultanates, and empires, equally devout and equally prone to internal squabbles. Between them stood the Byzantine Empire, the last vestige of Rome, clinging to its imperial dignity like a cat to a curtain. For centuries, Byzantium had been the Christian bulwark in the East, guarding the gates of Europe. But in the 11th century, a new player entered the game, and they weren't here to make friends. The Seljuk Turks, originally from Central Asia, were the kind of guests who show up, convert to Sunni Islam, and then conquer half your house. By 1071, they were feeling confident. So confident, in fact, that they met the Byzantine army at the Battle of Manzikert and handed them a defeat so crushing it made the emperor rethink his life choices. The Seljuks didn't just win. They took most of Anatolia, including cities like Nicaea and Antioch, which were practically Christian theme parks. Byzantium was bleeding, and the Turks were carving up the map like it was a roast. In 1092, the mighty Sultan Malik Shah died, and his empire promptly did what empires do best when their leader dies. It fell apart. Local warlords started playing Who Wants to Be a Sultan, and the Byzantine Empire found itself under renewed attack from every direction. Desperate, Emperor Alexius I Comnenus did what any self-respecting emperor would do. He wrote a very polite, very panicked letter to Pope Urban II, asking for help. Now, Urban wasn't just any pope. He was a man with vision, ambition, and a flair for drama. Alexius's letter landed on his desk like a gift from heaven. Urban saw a chance to heal the great schism between Eastern and Western churches, rein in the unruly barons of Europe by sending them far, far away, reclaim Jerusalem, the crown jewel of Christian imagination. So in 1095 at Clermont, Urban preached a sermon so fiery it could have melted a chalice. He called on knights and foot soldiers to take up arms and march east, not for gold, not for glory, but for God. And then he dropped the mic. Whoever for devotion alone, not to gain honor or money, goes to Jerusalem to liberate the Church of God can substitute this journey for all penance. Translation: kill for Christ and you get a free pass to heaven. The crowd went wild. Deus vult. Deus vult, they cried. God wills it. And just like that, the First Crusade was born. Urban's message spread like medieval wildfire. Thousands of knights, lords, and peasants took the cross, literally sewing it onto their clothes. They became known as crucesignati, or crusaders. While some saw opportunity for land and loot, most were driven by spiritual salvation. They were ready to walk, fight, and die for a chance to escape hell's barbecue. Urban had hoped for a well-organized military expedition. What he got first was Peter the Hermit, a barefoot preacher with charisma and a donkey. Peter rallied tens of thousands of peasants, townsfolk, and zealots into what became the People's Crusade, a sort of holy flash mob. Unfortunately, they were about as disciplined as a tavern brawl. In the Rhineland, some turned their zeal against local Jewish communities, massacring thousands. The church condemned it, but the damage was done. In summer 1096, the People's Crusade marched east. Peter's main group followed the Danube, looting Christian towns in Hungary when supplies ran low. By the time they reached Constantinople, Emperor Alexius was ready to throw them across the Bosphorus just to be rid of them. Once in Anatolia, they were ambushed and slaughtered by the Turks. Peter survived, barely, and slunk back to Constantinople. Meanwhile, the real muscle was on the move. Europe's elite lords assembled their forces. Godfrey of Bouillon, with brothers Eustace and Baldwin. Hugh of Vermandois, brother to the French king. Robert of Flanders, Robert of Normandy, Stephen of Blois, Raymond of Toulouse with papal legate Adhemar of Le Puy, Bohemond of Taranto and Tancred, Norman warlords from Italy. By December 1096, they converged on Constantinople, forming an army of 60,000, the largest Europe had seen since Rome fell. Alexius had expected a few mercenaries. What he got was a medieval mega-army. He especially distrusted Bohemond, who had a habit of attacking Byzantium, so Alexius made the Crusader leaders swear oaths to return any captured Byzantine land. Only then did he ferry them across the Bosphorus. The Crusaders were tough, especially the armored knights, who made up about a sixth of the force. But they had to adapt fast to the heat, terrain, and hit-and-run tactics of the Turks. Luckily, the Islamic world was a hot mess. The Seljuk Empire was fractured, its governors squabbling, and the Fatimids of Egypt were fighting the Turks too. No one saw the crusade coming. The Crusaders' first major win came at Nicaea, after a 6-week siege. But just as they were sharpening their swords for plunder, the city surrendered to the Byzantines. The Crusaders were furious. They'd fought, bled, and now had to watch their loot go to someone else. It was the first of many tensions between East and West. Now pause for a sec. Step into the extraordinary. Subscribe to Eccentric Digital Pixel. Welcome to the wild frontier of creativity, where pixels pulse with imagination and every frame tells a story you've never seen before. We don't follow trends. We bend reality. Get exclusive access to jaw-dropping digital creations. Be the first to witness new drops by turning on notifications. Don't just scroll. Experience the pixel revolution. Smash that subscribe button and ring the bell to never miss a masterpiece. Because normal is boring, and you were born to see the world differently. After the fall of Nicaea, relations between the Crusaders and the Byzantines were already wobbling like a drunk monk on a pilgrimage. The Byzantines had snatched the city's surrender, denying the Crusaders their hard-earned loot. Trust, fractured. Smiles, forced. Still, the crusade pressed on. The army split into 2 columns. The vanguard under Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman warlord with a taste for conquest and a beard that could intimidate a bear, and the rearguard under Godfrey of Bouillon, the pious knight from Lorraine, who looked like he'd been carved from cathedral stone. They marched inland through the scorching Anatolian summer, their armor baking them like meat pies in a smith's oven. Near Dorylaeum, Bohemond's column was ambushed by a massive Turkish force. The Seljuk cavalry descended like a thunderstorm of hooves and arrows. Bohemond, realizing he was about to be turned into a historical footnote, sent an urgent message to Godfrey. Bring everything, and hurry. He then did what Normans do best, dug in. His knights formed a shielded perimeter, while the infantry huddled behind them, protecting the camp followers and wagons. The Turks attacked from all sides. Horse archers loosed arrows, javelins rained down, and light cavalry darted in and out, slicing through the Crusader ranks. The knights were driven back onto their own infantry. It was chaos. It was carnage. It was medieval warfare at its most brutal. But the line held. Godfrey arrived like a divine thunderclap. His troops poured into the fray, slotting into the battle like pieces on a chessboard. On the Turkish left flank, the terrain had hidden the Crusader advance. Suddenly, Christian knights emerged from the hills like ghosts with lances. They charged together, a wall of steel and fury. The Turks, caught off guard and fearing encirclement, panicked and fled. It was a major victory. The Crusaders could now march across Anatolia with swagger in their step and fewer arrows in their backs. At Heraclea, they defeated a small Turkish force. Then the army split again. The main force trudged through the mountains of Cappadocia, losing baggage animals and nearly their minds. Supplies ran low, morale dipped. The terrain was unforgiving. Meanwhile, Baldwin of Boulogne and Tancred, ever the opportunists, headed south into Cilicia, capturing Tarsus and other cities. Tancred eventually rejoined the main army, but Baldwin was invited by Armenian Christians to Edessa, where he was installed as Count Baldwin of Edessa. The first Crusader state was born. In October 1097, the Crusaders reached Antioch, the last major Turkish stronghold before Jerusalem. But Antioch was a fortress of nightmares, its citadel perched atop of a 1,000-foot mountain, its walls too vast to encircle. The Crusaders camped outside and prayed for a miracle. Winter came. Supplies dwindled, starvation set in, horses died, men died, camp followers died, morale plummeted. A trickle of supplies arrived from Cyprus, and they managed to defeat Radwan of Aleppo at the Battle of Lake Antioch, but it was a hollow victory. In March, a crusader fleet brought reinforcements. Then, one night, Bohemond and 60 men scaled a tower on the southern wall. Its commander had been bribed. At dawn, the gates were flung open. The crusaders stormed the city, massacring soldiers and civilians. Survivors fled to the citadel, which still held out. Antioch had fallen. But the crusaders were now trapped. A massive Turkish army under Kerbuga, governor of Mosul, was on the march. He first attacked Baldwin in Edessa, but gave up after 3 weeks and turned toward Antioch. The crusaders were exhausted, starving, and encircled. Emperor Alexius, misinformed that the crusade had already failed, retreated to Constantinople. No help was coming. Then, inside Antioch, a monk claimed to discover the Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side. Whether divine relic or clever forgery, it revived the crusaders' faith. They saw visions of saints and angels. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and half dead, but they charged out of the city like men possessed. Kerbuga's army broke and fled. He accused his commanders of treachery, possibly rightly, and burned his camp. The citadel surrendered. Antioch was theirs. In summer 1098, the Fatimids of Egypt captured Jerusalem from the Artukid Turks. Their vizier, al-Afdal, saw the Seljuks as the real threat and even tried to ally with the Crusaders. But the Crusaders weren't interested in diplomacy. They wanted Jerusalem, not politics. Instead, they spent 5 months around Antioch, foraging, feuding, and arguing like medieval reality stars. Stephen of Blois and Hugh of Vermandois had already given up and gone home. After the miraculous victory at Antioch, Bohemond of Taranto did what any ambitious Norman warlord might do when standing inside a city he'd just helped conquer. He claimed it for himself. Never mind that it was a former Byzantine city, or that he'd sworn an oath to Emperor Alexius to return such lands. Bohemond argued that Alexius had broken the oath first by failing to send help during the siege. It was a classic medieval move. Break your promise, but make it sound like the other guy started it. And so Bohemond declared himself Prince of Antioch, planting his banner and his ego firmly in the east. Then came another blow. Bishop Adhemar of Le Puy, the Crusade's spiritual leader and the glue holding the fractious lords together, died of illness. Without him, the Crusader Council became a medieval version of a dysfunctional family dinner. Arguments, rivalries, and no one willing to pass the salt. And if that wasn't enough, the Crusaders committed one of the darkest acts of the campaign, the massacre at Ma'arat al-Numan. Starving and desperate, they slaughtered civilians, some accounts even suggesting cannibalism. It was a moment of horror that stained the Crusade's legacy forever. Despite the divisions, pressure from the rank-and-file Crusaders, those who had taken the cross for salvation, forced the leaders to put aside their differences and march south toward Jerusalem. All except Bohemond, who stayed behind in Antioch, polishing his new title and probably his armor. As the Crusaders entered Fatimid territory, many local rulers, not eager to test their luck, offered money and supplies to avoid violence. Other villages were simply abandoned, their wells poisoned, trees cut down, and livestock driven away. The land had been scorched, and the Crusaders were walking into a desert of despair. On the 7th of June, 1099, the Crusaders saw Jerusalem for the first time. Many fell to their knees, weeping with joy. But joy wouldn't feed them, and tears wouldn't breach walls. They were down to 12,000 fighting men, not enough to encircle the city. Supplies were low, water was scarce, and the landscape offered no timber for siege engines. Their first assault on 13th of June involved a single scaling ladder. It was repulsed easily. The Crusaders needed a miracle, or a carpenter. 4 days later, 6 Genoese galleys arrived at Jaffa, only to be blockaded by the Fatimid fleet. So the sailors did something brilliant and insane. They dismantled their ships, carried the timber overland, and delivered it to the siege. The Crusaders also foraged wood from the surrounding countryside, enough to build 2 siege towers. One was assigned to Raymond of Toulouse in the southwest, the other to Godfrey of Bouillon in the north. On the 8th of July, the entire crusade walked in religious procession around the city, ending with a service on the Mount of Olives. It was a plea to heaven, a show of unity, and a psychological flex. Then, on the night before the final assault, Godfrey moved his siege tower to a less defended section of the wall. It was a tactical masterstroke. On the 15th of July 1099, the final assault began. Godfrey's troops breached the walls, establishing a bridgehead. Soon, crusaders poured into the city. What followed was a frenzy of religious euphoria and bloodlust. They butchered soldiers and civilians, Jews and Muslims, women and children. It was brutal, prolonged and barbaric, but not unusual for the age. The First Crusade had achieved its goal. Against all odds, Jerusalem was taken. Just 4 weeks later, the Crusaders faced a Fatimid relief army at the Battle of Ascalon. They smashed it, securing their hold on Jerusalem. Most Crusaders, their vows fulfilled, returned home. Only about 300 knights remained, led by Godfrey of Bouillon, now titled Defender of the Holy Sepulchre. And the man who had started it all, Pope Urban II, died 2 weeks after Jerusalem fell, never knowing his crusade had succeeded. From the ashes of conquest rose the Crusader states, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Edessa. They were surrounded by enemies, and the Muslim world, once divided, began to unite in response. The Holy Land would become a battleground for nearly 2 centuries. More crusades would follow, but none would ever match the bloody, spectacular success of the First Crusade. Next up, the Battle of Hattin. The tides will turn, the desert winds will shift, and a new warrior will rise. So if you've been gripped by this tale of faith, fury, and fire, don't forget to follow us, subscribe, click that notification bell,